Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Murder by Moonlight by K.L. Montgomery, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Prologue. Gazing across the city of Charleston and the Ashley River, the shadowy figure adjusted binoculars to focus on the target. The live oaks and pines were so thick it was nearly impossible to see the structures that made up Fairytale Forest. The theme park had been around for decades, but if the villain, driven by greed and revenge, had their way, Fairytale Forest days were numbered. And the perfect plan was to close down the park. And the perfect plan to close down the park was in the works. Chapter 1. Catherine. Family traditions are cool and all, but this one is definitely not my favorite, Jaden Forrest admitted as he pushed a broom down Storybook Street, the main thoroughfare in his family's theme park. I cocked my head at the midnight breeze coming off the Ashley River, rustling my hair. Understood, but I admire your parents for keeping the tradition alive. Just think, your father stood right where you are when he was your age. He might have even been pushing the same broom. I laughed as I pushed the rickety janitorial cart that likely dated back to the 1960s when Fairytale Forest first opened. Jaden rolled his eyes. You'd think they could spring for some new equipment at least. You know your parents. They not only believe in carrying on your grandparents' traditions, but waste not, want not is their mantra, along with, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Jaden scanned the towering tree structure that stood at the end of Storybook Street. I know. I guess I should just feel blessed that I'll inherit this place someday. Well, me and my siblings. Your parents are in great health. It's going to be a long while before that happens, I reminded him. Jaden Forrest was a phenomenal kid, though a little spoiled being the baby of the family, but his parents were teaching him how to work for a living, and I didn't mind being a bit of a mentor to him. He wouldn't be working in the custodial night shift for long. By next year, he'd be doing something more glamorous for sure. I'd still be here, though, pushing the same dang cart. How long have you been working here, Kat? Jaden swept up a small pile of leaves and trash into a dustpan. I looked down at my hands momentarily, surveying the prominent veins that had just started to pop up in the last few years. My hands were starting to look like my mother's. I remembered them well. Let's see, I got this job back in the early 2000s. I had just gotten divorced. I hadn't worked since before my kids were born, so I didn't have much of a resume. Your grandparents welcomed me on board with open arms. You never wanted to do anything else in the park? Jaden's dark hair was suddenly ruffled by the wind, which had suddenly picked up. Nope. I pushed the cart along, heading for the restrooms at the corner of the courtyard that opened out on the centerpiece of Fairytale Forest, a lucky 13-story tree with a number of cables running above the canopy of pines and live oaks. The cables were part of an aerial tram system that transported visitors to various attractions at opposite corners of the park. I sucked in the breeze floating off the river. I like it here at night. It's quiet. Karen's not my favorite, but Walter is easy to work for, and I don't have to deal with too many people. I wouldn't want to be in the park in the daytime when it's too peoply. The young man's head tipped back as laughter spilled out of his mouth. It felt good to entertain someone, but it was the truth. My longevity here and the cloak of night and quiet allowed me to do my best thinking. I wouldn't want to give that up. It brought peace to my soul. My dad said I would be here about 6 months before my next rotation begins, Jay explained, but I can kind of see the draw. He stepped abruptly and frowned, except when I step in gum. Ugh. Occupational hazard, I quipped, grabbing the goo begone from the cart. I was armed and dangerous with this stuff. It was just another night in paradise, otherwise known as after hours in a family amusement park. As I helped Jaden scrape the gum off his shoe in the pavement, one of the park cats roamed out and stopped to watch us. Jaden jumped a little and then laughed. I always forget we have cats here. I never see them during the day. It was your grandmother's idea, you know, a brilliant one at that. The cats keep the mice and other rodents away. I've never seen a mouse in all my years working in the park. That's amazing. He bent down and held out his hand to see if the cat would come over to him. You're not supposed to interact with them, I remind him gently, We aren't supposed to feed them or give them any attention so they don't become too accustomed to humans. But Jaden was crouched down, beckoning the cat over to him. But this one is so cute. What's its name? I look at the fluffy feline with long gray fur. She glanced around and then casually began to lick her paw. We aren't supposed to interact with the cats, but we did have names for them. That's Zoe. I'm the one who got to name her. She just looks like a Zoe to me. Zoe. I like that. She's really pretty. Her fur is the same color as your hair, Jaden helpfully observed. Yeah, he didn't have to remind me that I'd gone completely gray in the past few years. Kids were good at pointing out stuff like that. Mine were all grown up and out of the house. The younger one just moved out last year. It was lonely living by myself, but I always looked forward to coming to work. Hey, did you clean the bathrooms yet? My work bestie's bubbly voice cut through the humid night air. Hey, yourself, I shouted back at her, waiting for her to appear out of the shadows. Gloria stepped out from behind the Witch's Cauldron candy store on the corner across from the restrooms. She wound a colorful scarf around her head, and her crown of salt and pepper braids sprang out from it like confetti. We could clean it together. I'll take the men's and you take the women's. I shook my head onto her ploy. You know as well as I do that the women's restrooms are usually worse. She laughed. You got me there. Want to do them together? Fine. I smiled and turned to Jaden. Finish sweeping the courtyard and we'll meet you in the staff lounge in an hour for our break. Okay, have fun, ladies. He dipped his chin and swept his way toward the enormous tree. Zoe scampered off into the bushes, and I heard a slight scuffle. She either found prey to chase, or she was asserting herself. The feral cats were known to have tiffs here and there, and Zoe was one of the dominant ones. She led the small band of cats that hung out in the bushes surrounding the central courtyard. I followed Gloria into the women's restroom. Paper towels littered the floor, and one of the toilets was overflowing. Oh my word, Gloria exclaimed, her hands immediately flying to cover her nose. Good gracious, it stinks to high heaven in here. Might need to call Chuck in maintenance for that last stall. I pointed to where the water was leaking out onto the concrete floor. Let's do that and start on the men's instead. Good plan, she nodded as I whipped out my walkie-talkie and put in a call to maintenance. The men's restroom was less of a disaster. We talked as we scrubbed everything down. It made the time and unpleasant task go faster. Did you hear about Heather's latest? Gloria asked as she sprayed down the sinks and wiped the mirrors. What is that awful woman up to now? I rolled my eyes. Heather Suka was the day shift custodial supervisor, and no one liked her. Actually, that was putting it mildly. I couldn't think of a single person at Fairytale Forest who didn't loathe her. Someone said she and Walter were caught messing around out behind the guest services building. The rumor exploded out of Gloria's mouth like she'd been holding it in all night. I gasped. What? Walter wouldn't do that. He's happily married. Walter McDuff was in charge of custodial services in the entire park. I didn't care much for Karen York, our immediate supervisor, so I always went to Walter when I had an issue, and he never let me down. Gloria shrugged. Well, it's what I heard anyway. I didn't believe it either, but I'm sure as heck not going to let that one go by without comment. Well, no. When I joined her in the laughter, the sound bounced all around the cement walls of the restroom, likely echoing into the park. Seconds later, footsteps sounded on the concrete floor. Are you two working in here or having comedy hour? Snarled a familiar voice. That grating nasal Midwestern accent could only belong to Karen, our immediate supervisor. She wasn't as hated as Heather, but she did live up to her name. Comedy hour, Gloria deadpanned, her fists flying to her hips. She cocked her head. Don't worry, our whole routine is about how men can't hit the toilet, but they sure love shooting things. Maybe if we made it into a video game. A slight smirk cracked Karen's pasty white face. Heather's called a meeting at 6 a.m. when she and the day shift come in. Make sure you're there. But we're supposed to clock out at 6, I complained. I'll see you at 6, Karen reiterated, and then she stomped right on out of the restroom, her footsteps pounding into the concrete and echoing off the walls as she went. Gloria rolled her eyes. Naked mud wrestling. Who you got? Heather or Karen? Ew. Does it have to be naked? I grimaced. But definitely Heather. You just know she'd play dirty. Pardon the pun. My work bestie threw her head back as laughter spilled out of her mouth. Agreed. Karen is always by the book and always brown-nosing Walter. She'd probably lick his boots if he let her. We both had a good laugh thinking about the two shift supervisors going head to head in a mud-filled pit. They didn't exactly get along, what with both of them having extremely abrasive personalities. That laugh would hopefully carry us right through till it was time to clock out in the morning. Zoe. If Vinny was going to come to my side of the park and try to recruit my Toms and Mollies to what amounted to the feline mafia on the other side of the park, then I was going to sit back and enjoy the show. Little did he know how loyal my minions were to me. Well, except maybe Sass. And if she wanted to find out if the mice were tastier on the other side, she was welcome to. I'd been waiting for that obnoxious diva to get out of my fur for a while now. My tail twitched just as Vinny sweet-talked Sass in the shadows of the looming tree. Hours ago, when the park was still open and we were still on the down low, the tree was all lit up, but now it was a dark, towering giant reaching up toward the glowing full moon. Its long, articulated limbs cast shadows all around the central courtyard area, our home turf. The bipeds were doing their nightly cleaning routine, and we were hunting mice. That was our job and what we were good at. I didn't have to hunt mice anymore, though sometimes I did it just for kicks. I operated in more of a supervisory capacity these days. I'd paid my dues, and now I had my underlings to carry on the family business. Work smarter, not harder, my daddy always said. My brother Mooney helped me keep tabs on all the tabbies, calicos, and solid color cats under my proverbial thumb. Proverbial, because we don't have thumbs. Get it? We had all the Mollies, Amber, Zeddy, and Daisy, and the aforementioned Sass, and we had the Toms, Mooney, Hank, Cool, and Ice. Vinny crossed over into our territory on occasion, but he was affiliated with the clowder on the south side of the park, near the entrance and parking lots. The leader over there was Scar, so named not only for the Lion King villain, but also for the jagged scar that ran down the side of his face and right through his left eye. Legend had it that he'd rumbled with an alligator back in the day, and it cost him his vision in that eye. What was left was an unseeing, milky white orb. Scar was, in a word, a scumbag. You didn't want to mess with him because he wasn't nice, he wasn't reasonable, and every decision he made was completely self-serving. He didn't care about the well-being of the other cats in his clowder. All he cared about was making sure he got the most food, the most power, and the most notoriety of all the cats in Fairytale Forest. And there were about 200 of us. The numbers fluctuated because cats came and went. Sometimes cats messed up and were lured in by the bipeds, cozying up to them for treats or scritches behind the ear. You know, those hard-to-reach areas. My own mom was carried off by one of the cat wranglers a few years ago when she let one of the janitors pick her up and use her glorious long nails in that sensitive spot right behind the ears and down the neck. Mama was purring so loud I heard her from behind the bushes where our clowder hung out during the day when the park was thick with bipeds. That was the last I saw of her. My cats knew better than to get too close to the bipeds. Our job was to rid the park of vermin, and we had the smarts and skills to do just that. I heard a hiss and a screech in the alley further down Storybrooke Street, and my instincts kicked in. I wasn't a fan of running, but before I knew it, my paws were pounding the pavement to track down the source of the noise. I needed to make sure none of my cats were in trouble again. A few of those dolts, well, as I said it, I had to keep tabs on them. I found Mooney backing a rather aggressive looking rat up against a metal dumpster in the Magical Mushroom restaurant. I found Mooney backing a rather aggressive looking rat up against a metal dumpster the Magical Mushroom restaurant emptied its leftovers into. You need help, bro? I called out. His whiskers twitched as he dipped his chin in acknowledgement. His green eyes shifted quickly to the side and back, sending me instructions. With a high-pitched trill, I dissipated a help signal to summon the troops. The rat reeked, clearly afraid for its life as its fur stood on end and its tail froze in place. Its nostrils flared as it tried to figure a way out, but soon it was surrounded as amber, seedy, and ice arrived, licking their lips and taking their places in an arc just inches away from our trapped prey. It's not going to end well for this guy, Mooney joked as he looked over his shoulder at me with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. On three, I announced. I counted down from three, and then it was all over there. It was all over from there for Mr. Rat.